Hello, welcome back. This is the Shipper Update. I'm Anthony Smith, lead economist here at FreightWaves, and it's Monday, so that means one thing. We have a week in review, or expectations, outlook for this week in economic, shipper-related releases in the coming week. So starting it off, of course, we have this chart behind me. This is going to be total construction spending, which is going to get updated in the coming week, along with, of course, my favorite chart that you can find within Sonar, our flatbed outbound tender rejection index here in this green line. And as you can see in the green line, flatbed activity has been increasing, or capacity has gotten much more tight as we've gone throughout this few quarters here. It's continued to step up and increase month after month after month, week after week, and in a pretty consistent basis. Of course, we see some downward movement here, but really overall trend moving upwards. When we look at some of the impacts that go into that, of course, some of that's going to be construction spending and construction activity. And of course, when we look at construction spending, I don't know if you've heard, but there's been some inflation, and that is definitely going to play a role. But even after that inflation is accounted for, there is still a fair amount of construction activity going on throughout the country. So a lot of that is going to be tied to residential construction. So this is going to be one of those areas where we look to for a lot of activity feeding into those flatbed trailers. Also, this is a little bit time of the year where we don't typically see a lot of activity for those flatbed trailers. You think about, hey, some of these states are having these heavy winter conditions, some of the manufacturing is going to start easing, but right now we're seeing a lot of activity persist throughout these typically slower months. Now, one of the other things that we have to take into account when we think about construction activity, of course, recently we saw that there have been a lot of expectations for interest rates to go up. We also saw mortgage rates increase. So with that anticipation, there was quite a pull forward for some people, some individuals, to get that ball rolling on some of those construction and housing starts. So that means that there are some permits in place. Some of those housing starts are beginning, sort of, because there's still a lot of homes that have been authorized but not yet started. There are more homes that are being worked on right now but not yet completed, and the time it takes to complete a home is taking longer as well. So there's a lot of issues going on beneath the surface when we're looking at some of the construction trends going on, but nonetheless, this data point is going to get updated in the coming weeks, so be sure to check that one out and see how it relates, of course, to our flatbed outbound tender rejection index. Of course, in the green line here, this thing is updated on a daily basis, near real-time data, so it's going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek as to what to expect in some of these really pertinent economic releases and what it might mean to you. Moving into our next chart here, that was residential. We have non-residential as well. That's going to be an area to watch, I think, throughout the remainder of 2022. Now, of course, we saw some downward movement here, of course, throughout the pandemic. A lot of that's going to be, of course, kind of accounted to not as many offices going up, things like that. But there is going to be opportunity, of course, with the infrastructure bill coming through. Highway street spending is going to be an area of opportunity. We also see that warehousing is going to be a much needed area for growth here. As we've seen throughout the supply chain, the growth of e-commerce, things like that really shows how much warehouse space is really at a premium right now. So this is going to likely be an area to watch closely, especially towards the middle to latter half of 2022, going into 2023 as well. So be sure to keep your eye on this release, because a lot of times it goes kind of under the radar. Moving into our next chart here, of course, we have our Institute of Supply Management, the Purchasing Managers Index here. This is going to be one we watch closely as well. It's going to get updated in the coming week. We have here in the green line, we have the ISM PMI Price Index, which has been rising at a pretty steady clip. And in the blue line, we have the ISM PMI, so that's the manufacturing index overall. So looking at these two, we've seen that they've persisted to really kind of have that above 50 growth pattern. That means expansion overall. So this is going to be expansion within manufacturing. Now, again, if you remember, beginning of this shipper update segment, we're talking about some of those areas that really feed into flatbed activity. Manufacturing is going to definitely be one of them. And one of the areas that we've seen a lot of activity really kind of persist over the last few quarters here as well. Remember, made a call, I think it was June or July of last year, that manufacturing was back. If you haven't checked out that video, I definitely recommend it, because we have seen persistent growth since then. Moving on to throughout this report, we're also going to be looking at new orders. We're going to be looking at backlog orders as well, because that's going to be indicative of future activity as we move on throughout the month. And so that's going to be a close one to watch, or a cool one to watch, I should say. And definitely don't just look at the headline number, but look at some of the other aspects beneath the report. So that's going to do it for the shipper update. We'll check in with you again throughout the show, but right now we're going to toss it over to Thomas Watson.